Welcome, everyone, to the Information's TITV. My name is Akash Pasricha. It is Tuesday, January 13th. We have a breaking story out of our Asia Bureau. The Information has exclusive reporting that China is restricting Nvidia chip purchases to special circumstances. We'll have more on that story in just a second. We're also breaking down Meta's big new Meta Compute initiative aimed at scaling its data center footprint. We have a data center expert coming on the show to talk about that. We'll then shift to a conversation with our Google and Apple reporters about the landmark partnership between those two companies that will bring Google's Gemini into new versions of Siri. I'm also bringing on a deal-making expert, the chief business officer at Brex, to get his take on all of these collaborations. And finally, we will wrap with another story that we published today about how Google is going to great lengths to secure enough power for its rapidly expanding data center build-out. It is a big show, so let's get right on into it. The Information published exclusive reporting that China is restricting Nvidia chip purchases to special circumstances. I want to bring on our co-executive editor, Martin Pierce, to break it all down. Martin, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you here.
Hey, good morning, Akash.
So we saw this report coming out of our Asia Bureau. What do we know? What's the news?
Well, what my colleagues in Asia have reported is that the Chinese government met with some tech companies this week and has told them that they will only approve the purchases of the H200 chips under special circumstances, and that the company should only consider buying the chips if it's absolutely necessary. Now, what that means is not very clear. They did indicate that they would approve purchases by universities, which suggests that they will allow them, but they really don't want the companies to be buying them as a matter of course. And that's bad news for Nvidia, which had been hoping that the fact that Trump had said he would approve Nvidia to export these chips, that gave a sign that Nvidia might be able to get back into China, which is a very important market for them.
And I guess it's also not that great for customers in China, the businesses that are trying to get the latest and greatest Nvidia chips, right?
That's right. The companies like Alibaba and ByteDance need these chips because the locally made chips that the government wants them to buy are not as good in training the AI models as Nvidia's chips are. So that is the problem.
And, I wonder, when you have a story like this that is changing so quickly and the details, look, I mean, they are what they are today. A week from now, things might change. What are the broader questions around the US-China AI race that come to mind for you leading a newsroom here?
Well, you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, we reported last week that the government was, they were sort of they were indicating that they were going to be very careful in whether they would approve the purchases, and they've begun to harden their position. Our story says that because the government was a little vague, it sort of opened the door to the idea that they might relax these restrictions over time. It really does depend on, I think, relations between the governments. We had reported last week there was some speculation that Trump's moves in Venezuela might have annoyed China, which buys much of its oil from there, and that China might have been responding to that by clamping down on Nvidia chips. So the questions that we look for is obviously we're trying to track what is influencing the government and what could happen next.
I want to ask you about another story that has been making headlines today and this week. The New York Times reported that Meta is going to cut about 10% of its staff in its Reality Labs group. They said some of those people might go to the wearables group. And then we also had this report from Bloomberg that Meta could double its Ray-Ban glasses output. So, we're seeing sort of a shifting focus here, maybe away from Reality Labs, more towards wearables. If we just stick with Reality Labs here for a second, we've written about this extensively at The Information. I mean, Is this just a minor restructuring in your view? Is it the beginning of the end for Reality Labs?
No,
What do you?
no. I think that the wearables is in Reality Labs.
Oh, okay.
I think that the Ray-Ban increase is a sign that they are um, focusing more on the product that has actually solved well, and they're trying to increase capacity. They had to recently restrict sales of those glasses in Britain because they didn't have enough production of them. So I think what they're saying is we're not going to invest as much in these sort of very futuristic metaverse technologies, which they've spent a fortune on over the last 5 years, and instead we're going to ramp up the glasses which have a real role in AI. I mean, I think Zuckerberg believes, and he's not the only one, that AI in the future, people will interact with it using wearables. So I think that they're just refining the focus. They're not, and I mean, Reality Labs has been a huge money pit, and they're trying to rein that in because they're also spending a fortune on AI development.
Right. So I mean, this is really them doubling down on what is selling essentially and going to where
Right,
the market
right,
market is taking them. Got
right.
it. Well, thank you for clarifying that. As these are the nuances that sometimes we miss here on the show, but we are grateful to have you on to help us make sense of it all. That is Martin Peers, our co-executive editor here at The Information. Okay. Mark Zuckerberg made big news yesterday in another sphere as well, announcing a new initiative called Meta Compute. He said the company would build tens of thousands of gigawatts of data center compute capacity over the next 10 years, and eventually will build hundreds of gigawatts. Dina Powell McCormick, who Meta just tapped to be president and vice chairman, will help oversee the initiative along with other Meta executives. I want to bring on Raul Martynek, CEO of data center management company DataBank, to help us make sense of Meta's new compute initiative. Raul, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So, I've been dying to talk to someone who is deeply integrated into the data center story to help us make sense of what these big announcements from hyperscaler tech companies and Meta mean. How are people in your orbit reacting to the announcement yesterday from Meta declaring, "Hey, we're on a 10-year journey now, and hundreds of gigawatts are coming"?
Yeah, well, look, it's one of many announcements like that. Obviously, earlier last year we had the Stargate announcement, right, which at the time seemed to be, astronomical, $500 billion. And now we have, announcements like this, and others have also said that. So, I mean, fundamentally, there is obviously a big boom in terms of building data center capacity to support, these artificial intelligence efforts, right? Couple things to remember. I mean, this announcement really was, as you know, it was a thread post, so there wasn't a lot of details. It's really kind of an indication that, hey, we are going to invest in capacity over the long term, and long term is really the operative word here, because data centers, they just don't get built in a quarter or a year, and especially at this scale, it actually takes years to build these things, right? So, earlier this week, Meta made an announcement on the nuclear power side where they made a number of commitments to, some of these startup nuclear power companies, Oklo and TerraPower, plus some existing nuclear power, plants with Vistra, and that again is a long-term indication. So look, my view is that it's an announcement. Meta's obviously made some big investments, most recently in Louisiana, where they're building a 2.2 gigawatt data center campus there in partnership with a group called Blue Owl. Something like that, it's not going to see capacity till, 2 years from now, right? So these are kind of long term.
This is a long time away still. I mean, this is
Yeah.
really just the start. And I mean, you hinted at it here, but how does the scale of what Zuckerberg was talking about yesterday, how does that compare to their existing footprint in terms of data centers?
Oh, it would be, a 10x, a 15x, right? So to give you some perspective, right, before this AI craze started in 2023, the world had about, call it 35 gigawatts of data center capacity, with half of it in the US. Over the last couple of years, we've seen, record, as we call it, absorption in the space. Last year, the estimate's about 10 gigawatts. So we're probably in the 50 to 60 gigawatt on a global basis. It's hard to keep track because there's so many announcements. With again about half of that being in the U.S. So obviously, if you're saying you're going to develop hundreds of gigawatts, well, that's orders of magnitude more than what we have today. But I think we have to like step back and say, okay, what is actually this capacity going to be used for, right? I mean, ultimately, we know the state of AI, right? We have a bunch of companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, and Mistral, generating revenue, but these revenue numbers are modest, especially when you compare it to the size of the investments required. So I think we need to, take a deep breath and see how this plays out over the next 12 to 18 months, see how the monetization of this technology emerges. And then I think, that monetization will ultimately have to merge with these investments, because obviously what we don't want is to have, too much investment go into an area where, the revenue can't keep up with it because,
Right.
we've seen that film before in 2000.
Well, you hit on a good point here, which is that what are these data centers going to get used for? One of the things I've been thinking about is Meta has, of course, its ads business. And we've talked a little bit on this show about Meta can use its AI for personal superintelligence and some of its more longer term bets. But then it also has this ad business that can make a lot of use of AI in, what is very much a profitable business for them. To what extent do you think these data centers that the company is building, does it have to be all moonshot bets that the demand is sort of accounted for, or is the ads business and the growth of an ads business? I mean, does that warrant a data center built out at all the way they're doing it?
Yeah, that's a great point, because when we talk about AI, we tend to not explain too much the go-to-market strategy, and that these large players, especially the hyperscalers and Meta, they all have different strategies around AI. You're absolutely right. In the case of Meta, I see their investments happening in two areas, and Zuckerberg's given a couple interviews where he's talked about this. I mean, they have an incredible ad business, right? There's no doubt machine learning before that. Now, LLMs, generative AI is helping them generate more revenue on the advertising side. So they're going to make investments there. Your previous guest was talking about Reality Labs, and obviously we know Meta's made a huge bet on the metaverse, which really hasn't panned out there. So there's other of these kind of long-term investments where they want to apply this technology towards agentic AI, or trying to monetize what they have with WhatsApp, or through Reality Labs and the metaverse and things like that. So those are the ones that are more speculative, but there's no doubt that a big part of this is about just growing their organic business, and that, as proven by their track record, that's a good investment.
I want to ask you about the risks that come with a data center build out of this scale. And here I'm talking not just about Meta, I'm talking about all of these tech companies, big and
Yep.
small, profitable or not profitable yet, who are building these data centers so quickly. I'm reminded of a project that we had at the information here. We had a database of gigafactories that were involved in building everything you need for electric vehicles and the materials and the batteries and stuff like
Yep.
that. And look, a lot of those facilities, I mean, they were announced, they maybe started construction, they were scaled back, some of them were shuttered entirely. Do you think that there's a chance here that some of these data centers that are working towards satisfying this AI demand 3 years from now, could we be seeing a similar scenario where these projects are scaled back, or even shuttered? And I say that knowing that at DataBank, your business is operating these data centers. Surely that is a risk that you must think about as you seek to advise people on what data centers they should build and not.
Yeah, that's the multi-trillion-dollar question at this point, right? And look, I here's the way I think about it. Long term, there is no doubt in my mind you're going to need more data center capacity. The question is, over short-term periods, 3 to 5 years, how does that supply demand curve look, right? And that, to my earlier comment, it really, you got to follow the revenue here. You got to follow, what is happening with these labs in terms of their revenue generation potential with this technology. And yes, you have a significant amount of capacity being brought online, presumably to support these new revenue streams. If those new revenue streams take longer to develop, well, guess what? There will be a quote unquote oversupply and we'll end up in a different situation. Again, I think long term, these investments, will make sense, but it's hard to predict, right? In 1995 and 97, I lived the dot-com era. Everyone was making the same investments on fiber. Well, guess what? It turned out it took a little longer to absorb all that fiber. It's still very useful, but a lot of people lost a lot of money. So that's kind of the way we think about it. And at DataBank, we're developing about 1 gigawatt of data center capacity across our footprint between 2026 and 2030. We think that's a reasonable amount of capacity to bring online where, regardless of kind of that macro supply demand, that we'll find customers for it.
And last question for you, as you think about the risks here, you talk about the demand risk, and that is something we'll see how it plays out. There's also what I sort of maybe call construction risk or innovation risk, which is, can you get the power? Can you get the economics of the power to work? We had a founder on the show yesterday who is innovating in the cooling space and finding new ways to cool things. As you think about the risks and where the rate limiting steps are, why these projects could take longer and longer, are power and cooling, are those the two main areas? Are there other areas that we should be thinking about in terms of bottlenecks or rate limiting steps?
Yeah, there's a lot of bottlenecks. I mean, obviously, access to power is a big one. But look what's happening, right? Some people are, to get around that, they're going into, 400 miles west of Texas, to be able to access power, right? Location, this is still a real estate business. So location is important for a lot of customers. So that's a constraint. The technical constraints really from a data center perspective, they don't really exist. It's about how you get that more efficiently. But, I'll give you another risk, which is, maybe we don't need so much power to power all this AI, right? If you look at Nvidia's recent, acqui-hire of Grok, the Grok platform developed by Jonathan Ross, who obviously is one of the founders of the TPU, that is a inference only type of platform.
Right. That could bring it down. That could bring it down entirely.
It operates at 10, 15, 20x less power consumption per token, right?
Right.
And there's a lot of new startups occurring in Silicon Valley that are trying to do 1,000x more efficient than the Nvidia GPU platform, right? So I think we have a long way to go before we say that power is the constraint on a long-term basis. It certainly is one of the constraints now.
Great. Raul, well, I want to thank you for coming on. That is Raul Martynek, the CEO of DataBank here on TITV. Okay. Apple and Google's deal yesterday was a landmark announcement for iPhone owners and the AI ecosystem at large. The companies announced that new versions of Siri will use Google's Gemini under the hood. Our Apple and Google reporters were both working the phones all day yesterday trying to figure out how exactly the deal will work behind the scenes. I want to bring them on to talk about it. This is Erin Tilley, our Apple reporter, and Erin Wu, our Google reporter. Welcome to the show. It's great to have you both here.
Thanks for having us.
The Erin and Erin show. Once again, we're missing Erin Holmes, as usual. I'm waiting for the trio segment. Erin Tilley, let's start with you. How is this deal going to work behind the scenes from what we know?
Yeah, so basically, Apple is allowed to take these Google models, the Gemini models, and adapt it for its own purposes. So it can tweak it and do what it needs to do behind the scenes to get it working on Apple products, Apple features like Siri. So it's really incorporating Gemini as if it will be an internal model. So it's not going to be routing out to Google servers. It's going to be incorporated like as if it's an internal sort of model that Apple's using for its features.
And remind us, timeline-wise, when are we expecting the new Siri to come out again?
So Apple's continually delayed it over the past almost 2 years now, and they've said this year is the year they'll finally kind of come out with what they initially promised in summer of 2024. And we understand there'll be some releases in the spring, and that they will then announce kind of a more full-fledged AI in the summer at their Worldwide Developers Conference.
Erin Wu, do we know how much Google is paying Apple here at all?
Yeah, actually, in this situation, Apple is paying Google, and we don't totally know.
Oh, sorry. Right. My bad.
Yeah,
Apple is paying. That's what I meant. How much is Apple
yeah,
paying Google?
right. Apple is paying Google. So yesterday, the two companies released a joint statement that did not get into any of the terms of the deal. So we don't 100% know. Bloomberg reported last fall that Apple is paying Google $1 billion annually. A source with knowledge of the agreement yesterday told me that the number could be way bigger than that. So this is definitely a win for Google from a monetary perspective.
And I wonder how you think, Erin Wu, about this from the context of Google now has this deal with Apple. Google obviously has the Samsung ecosystem and its whole Android operating platform as well. I mean, it just strikes me that they obviously would integrate Gemini into that ecosystem. And so now they really have the market cornered in terms of what I think are the top two distribution ways for hardware, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're really cornering the market essentially on mobile devices. So they've got this deal with Apple. They've also got a deal with Samsung. Last week, the Samsung co-CEO said that they plan to increase the number of devices running Gemini to 800 million, to like double the number of devices running Gemini. So Gemini there, like there's the Gemini consumer app, and there's also Gemini powers Galaxy AI, which is like a lot of AI features on Samsung phones. So essentially, like Google in a lot of ways has the kind of distribution that OpenAI is really trying to get via creating these mobile devices. Like Google already has essentially the mobile devices.
Erin, Tilley, one of the interesting parts of what you were reporting on was the privacy element of the data here. I know that when Apple Intelligence was announced, I mean, privacy was a big thing that they highlighted, and they had that whole private cloud server business. I don't understand how it works, but I remember them saying something to the effect of, "Don't worry, the data is still sort of private to your device, and or maybe you have a private cloud." Is any of that changing with these models here? How does it work with Siri?
Yeah, so none of those plans are changing at all, because the way they're incorporating these Gemini models, like incorporating them as if they're Apple AI models, they will look completely like they said earlier, where all the AI processing will happen either on device or in their private cloud system. And with their private cloud system, they promise they're not using that data to train their algorithms further. It's all just processed anonymously, not attached to a user. So they say this, through how they're incorporating Gemini, it'll continue to, promise that privacy.
And so, sticking with you, Erin, Tilley, what happens to the deal with OpenAI?
That's still in place. The deals were pretty different. The deal with OpenAI, it sort of links out to OpenAI. When you ask Siri a certain way, if you ask Siri a question a certain way, it will sometimes link out to OpenAI, including putting a prompt window saying, "Do you want to go to OpenAI?" So that still exists. It's just like it'll become even less and less relevant as Siri can answer these questions itself more and more with a Gemini helping it.
Hmm. Erin Wu, I'm sort of thinking back to all of these antitrust cases that Google was fighting, and I seem to remember the judge having said something to the effect of, the AI has changed the game entirely. And, when we were thinking about whether or not Google needed to sell Chrome, the judge said, "Hey, it's a totally different world than a couple years ago when these, antitrust lawsuits may have originally been filed." That was at a time when ChatGPT was ahead in the race against Gemini, and it still is ahead. I think based on the numbers, but here you have Google again doing big deals with Apple. Do people in your orbit talk about how quickly the game has changed and how somewhat ironic it is that that was one of the reasons that the judge ruled the way that it did?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely been an insane like vibe shift in the past few months where everyone's really bullish about on Google now. A lot of people are saying like, oh, like a lot of the doubt was misplaced, and we've seen them really come from behind in the past few months, in the past year, to either have models that are at least on par, if not better, than what OpenAI is doing. And Google is still behind it when it comes to chatbot distribution, like up, according to all of the numbers that we have. But Google also has all of these other distribution channels, like Google has search, Google has all of these other products that it's like increasingly putting Gemini in. And to your point with these distribution deals, in some ways they're following a very similar playbook with search, which is getting search on Apple, getting search on Android. Again, what came out in the remedies ruling was that Google isn't allowed to essentially tie the installment of Gemini to other apps. So they can't say, like, oh, if you want to have Maps or if you want to have YouTube, you also have to have Gemini. And so there's some stuff in the remedies ruling that's hopefully going to prevent Google from using similar illegal monopolistic techniques to distribute Gemini. But it's obvious that they have these relationships with Samsung, they have these relationships with Apple, and so they're also continuing to leverage them to get the AI on these devices. And again, like the models are good now, so it's not as if these companies are taking like an inferior model because of their existing
And
relationship.
just simplify what you were saying here for us for a second. The distribution deals. So remind us here. So the map stuff. What was the deal then? I just want to understand it.
Okay, so basically, what was ruled to be monopolistic was that Google was making exclusive distribution deals with partners like phone manufacturers, mobile carriers, etc. And and they would condition having other apps on having search. So, like, if you want to have these other apps, for example, the Android Play Store, without
Right.
which basically these phones are useless, like you also need to have search. And so right now in these deals, as far as we know, they're non-exclusive. They don't condition having any other apps on having Gemini. So as far as we know, Google is complying with the terms of the
Right.
remedy.
In other words, you can have an app that doesn't use Gemini. It's not like it's the only way that app is going to work, type of thing. Got it. Great. Well, it is an exciting deal, and I want to thank you both for coming on to help us make sense of it. That is Erin Wu, our Google reporter, and Erin Tilley, our Apple reporter, here at The Information. Okay. Apple's deal with Google this week is just the latest partnership that has seen even the biggest tech companies look outside their own businesses for ways to offer more to their customers. We, of course, have also seen a string of AI-related acquisitions lately as big companies try to grow their teams and their capabilities even faster. I want to bring on Art Levy, Chief Business Officer at Brex, to help us break down this current moment for these types of deals and transactions and partnerships. Art, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you here.
Great to be here again.
So, what is your assessment of this Apple-Google partnership that we saw this week?
Yeah, so I think the name of the game on everything you touched on, whether it's the M&As, the partnerships that we're seeing, is the need to move quickly. All companies, from a two-person startup to the largest businesses in the world, are realizing they need to move as fast as they can. And for a long time, Apple's Siri product has not been great. And so this is them admitting, okay, we will partner with Google Gemini and immediately, because it's going to ship in 26, make the feature set in Siri much, much better inside of Apple Intelligence. And for Google, this is a slam dunk, right? They immediately get access to the most valuable hardware ecosystem in the US, right? The iPhone has 60% market share in the US, and they have been unable to really work with that data up until this point. So I think it's Apple finally admitting, hey, let us work on what we do best. And by the way, there's no exclusivity agreement here in the sense that
Right.
Apple can continue working on their models in the background, but it's saying, hey, we need to delight the customer right now. And it's also a shot across the bow to OpenAI, frankly, because right now, if you know, there's queries that leave Siri and go to OpenAI if they
Right.
aren't properly handled. And so it's an interesting dynamic between these three tech titans.
So, one of the questions I had for you is, look, this partnership, we just talked about it with our reporters. I mean, this one a little more clear cut. This is Apple paying Google for access to the models. But time and time again, we see tech companies announcing partnerships, right? We have partnered, and you've led these deals as well at Brex. And I mean, as someone who has never done these types of deals before, I mean, does a
You'd be
partnership
good at them.
imply? Say it again.
I said you'd be good at them.
Well, let me just do the show first. All right, we'll talk about that later on. But uh, does it always imply that money is changing hands, or are there partnerships where it's really just I'm giving you these APIs or these tools, you're giving us something else? Help us understand how they work.
Yeah, so it all comes down to the business models of the companies at hand. And so in the partnership, it's always that one company is giving something and the other company is giving something else. But what they're getting doesn't necessarily have to come from the other company, if that makes sense. So if you look at fintech deals, for example, Brex recently announced a deal with Fifth Third Bank. That's about us being able to better monetize on their customer base through interchange, which is, something that is in the fintech ecosystem, how is the main business model. So you have to look at the business models of the companies. If we take the Apple Google deal, of course, Apple is paying Google, I think it's rumored $1 billion.
Yeah.
That's not really why Google's doing it, right? $1 billion, and it's crazy to say this, I don't think really moves the needle for Google. It's about
No.
getting access to the data ecosystem so that they can make their products better. And so with a lot of partnerships, you need to just look at what is the business model of the companies, and it will help you understand probably why they're doing those deals. So another partnership that was interesting recently is, OpenAI, ChatGPT announced their new health initiative, and they're partnering with a number of medical data providers. That's
Right.
all about making the user experience better for me when I log into ChatGPT and ask, hey, like, what's wrong with my leg?
But
And
but
so
I see it from the OpenAI angle, and I'm happy you brought that up because that was what I wanted to ask you about. Is we saw the health partnerships announced. I think it was last week. Earlier, we also saw OpenAI partnering, for example, with Bookings.com, and you can sort of integrate. Uh,
yeah.
you can sort of find your bookings or find bookings through the chat, and I think there's retailers that are going that route as well. It's very clear to me what OpenAI is getting in these situations, which is they're getting more functionality and more integration with their platform. For the platforms like a bookings.com, it's early, and we had the CEO of Booking Holdings here on the show, and he said, look, I mean, we just did it. It's not like we're going to see a dent or a change right off the bat. Is there not like a risk at all, do you think, for these platform companies in disintermediating the relationship with the customer? Do you think about that at all with these partnerships?
So I definitely think about it in the way and how Brex partners with companies. I think if I'm Booking.com, and you heard it from the horse's mouth, the
Yeah.
CEO, what I'm thinking is that OpenAI is becoming the opening panel to the internet for, 1 billion plus consumers. I want to be at the beginning of that journey. And if they book via me, via OpenAI, like, I'm still making money, right? So this is an example. Booking.com makes commissions off the customers when they book the hotels. Like, I want to immediately be in that flow and I want to be there. I don't think that even if they're not thrilled with what I would say is, like, maybe it's not the ideal outcome, but you have to take what you can
Right.
get, I
Right.
would say. And so if the choices are be left out or do it this way, I think he made absolutely
Right. And to be clear, I don't think any of this is going to change markedly quickly, in the next couple months or even a year or so. It's just I'm sort of curious the ways in which when people strike these partnerships, how do you think about the long-term implications of integrating? And so that's certainly an interesting thing to think about. The other topic I wanted to ask you about is if we sort of get out of partnerships, then we get into M&A and actual deals that we've seen a lot of. How are you looking at M&A this year in AI? We've seen all these big tech companies, public tech companies, buying their way to new talent. Where do you think it goes from here?
I think that we're really in the what I would call like another founder era for large tech CEOs, where it is an arms race and these CEOs are going to do whatever it takes to win. And so I think what that means for M&A is we're going to continue to see more of it, and we're going to see both the boilerplate normal buy the whole company type, and we're going to continue to see the very creative IP licensing. No one really knows what all the shareholders and employees got paid type. Because if you're Jensen or Zuck or Benioff, you are trying to win, and it is in your DNA to do what you think is right. You still control your company, even if it is a public company, and you're just going to push as hard as possible. And I think that's what you're seeing, back to what I said at the beginning of the show around speed. Like the Nvidia Grok deal was a licensing deal, not because they were trying to screw over employees, because what has come out is that everyone got paid in a way that made everyone whole, which is at least what I've been reading. It's about speed. I read that Jensen said we need to get this done in 2 weeks before Christmas. You just simply can't get a $20 billion deal done in 2 weeks with all the sign-offs, et cetera, from government, FTC, in that time frame, but you can get a licensing deal done. And so it was about, hey, let's do this as quickly as possible so we can move on. I think
You mentioned, yeah, go ahead.
the other thing that I think has been normalized this year is just extremely large M&A, right? Salesforce did, I think it was 10 M&As worth $12 billion. You saw this $20 billion Grok deal that was 3x the last round from just a few months ago. Essentially, I think folks, if you're in boardrooms and folks are like, okay, Jensen is going to pay, 1% of his market cap, 20% of his yearly free cash flow on this asset, like, maybe things are worth more, maybe certain things are worth more than I thought, or maybe we just need to pay whatever price to win more quickly, right? Like, this is like one of the smartest people in the world. And so I think it's leading to a lot of folks thinking like, like, am I thinking too small?
What happens to the employees in these types of deals? Not knowing the details closely, there's a lot of reporting out there as to which deals shook out better for employees. But if I'm an employee at a tech company, or I'm joining a startup, and I know that, hey, there might be a licensing deal on the horizon. Maybe it's not an acquisition. Are there any protections that I can take as an employee to help me earn that upside if that does happen?
Yeah, you nailed it. I think employees who obviously want to benefit from this, gold rush of AI and are working hard at these companies are getting smarter. So, for the longest time, you had simple change of control provisions that usually only executives would get, right? So single trigger of, okay, if there's an M&A, you get accelerated vesting. On your shares, and that's not that common. But I think anecdotally, what I'm hearing is that folks are starting to ask for, and in many cases receive, what I would call synthetic pref rights, which would mean that in certain scenarios, their common equity is treated similarly to the cap table, which is preference equity. And so essentially in a licensing deal, you pay out the pref stack. That's why investors have always been getting made whole, even in like the windsurf deal. But in this case, this employee would have what would be phantom pref equity, which is in this one type of scenario, you would get paid out like the pref stack. And I don't think employees are giving this to everyone, and probably many aren't, but there are definitely some folks that are getting this. And again, this is just employees with a lagging indicator getting smarter, because, and I'm a big proponent of this, employees should get paid for their work and should not get screwed in scenarios like this.
So this is becoming more common from the perspective of people who are trying to get hired at these companies. They are seeking these types of protections.
Yes, and I think employers are giving them because they realize that, like, yeah, there is a chance we do something crazy. There is a chance that someone comes in and offers a very big price, because things are getting more normalized because of the need to move quickly that we discussed.
Great. Well, Art, I want to thank you for the great discussion. That is Art Levy, the Chief Business Officer of Brex, here on TITV. Okay. The Information has a story out today analyzing the ways in which Google is trying to get power to all of its new data centers that it is building. One effort to that effect, the company paid $4.8 billion to buy a company called Intersect Power late last year. I want to bring on our finance reporter, Miles Kruppa, to help us understand what this deal will mean for Google and the power challenges at large. Miles, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Akash.
So we were just talking with our friend Raul Martynek over at DataBank earlier in the show about the power bottleneck that these data centers are going to face, possibly, although he made the point that maybe the chips will get better and maybe we won't need all the power. But the reality is Google did this deal to buy this company, Intersect Power. Tell us about what that company does and why they did the deal.
Yeah, Intersect Power basically creates what they call microgrids for data centers. So they take things like solar panels and batteries, hook them up, put them next to data centers, and make it all work with the existing electrical grid. They're sort of pioneering this new way, what some experts call behind the meter. It's one version of that to sort of power data centers. And so, interestingly, Google had actually been working with Intersect as far back as 2024 and had invested in the company and decided at the end of last year that it was the right time to make a move and buy it.
And when you say behind the meter, so not being an electricity expert here, but the idea here is that anytime you want to build a house or a data center or a factory, you basically tap the electric grid, the public electric grid, to get your power. And now we're at a position where you need private sources of power, essentially. The public infrastructure is not enough, right?
Yeah, exactly. All of the tech companies, as they're embarking on this huge AI data center push, are facing really long wait times to get connected to the local grid, often stretching into 3, 4, 5+ years. So there's a growing sort of bring your own power movement that Intersect is part of. The data centers that Google has been working with Intersect on still rely on the grid in part, but for most of their energy, or even during times of grid stress, they can rely on the solar power and the batteries that they've hooked up to the data centers as well.
Now, the part of your story that really went into detail and you took a closer look at is the regulatory angles to all this. So the fact that hyperscalers, Google is going private for its electricity needs. How does that sit with regulators? Are they happy about this? Are they not? Do they have to get more approvals?
Yeah, it's been a complicated picture for companies trying to do this. Basically, the state of play right now is that the local electricity municipalities basically have a lot of power over how these projects get approved and how they work and whether they're even feasible. And basically, Chris Wright, who's head of the energy department, directed this national energy regulator called FERC to try to unify some of this and make it easier for companies to more quickly hook up AI data centers. And so Google submitted a proposal in November that basically aligned exactly with the kind of work that Intersect is doing. They're proposing that regulators create a fast track 2 to 3 month process for approving data centers that bring their own sources of power. And that regulators favor ones that are able to be flexible when the grid is strained and sort of take some of that load off of the grid at those times. And so, it's clear from the acquisition and from Google's comments that it's thinking about this conundrum in a pretty unified way.
How big an ask is this to ask regulators to speed up the approval for something? Is that something that is common? Is it likely or unlikely that they get this fast-tracked approval?
Yeah, well, it's sort of creating a state versus federal tension that's long existed in these markets.
Never heard of that before.
Never happened in any other context. But I think the federal government sees maybe now being the right time to take a bit more control over how this process works and do a bit more central planning. We're sort of waiting to see how FERC responds by April. They've been collecting comments from all the tech companies, consumer advocates, utilities, and so they're going to have to weigh all of that by this April deadline.
And is Google the only company in this situation right now? Are other big hyperscaler companies also doing similar fast tracking type stuff with regulators?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's asking for sort of similar but different things from the regulators. I think they would all like to see things streamlined a bit more. But, there are some companies that don't want to have to sort of curtail their consumption of power from the grid voluntarily, like Google is suggesting it might be willing to do in some circumstances. And, certainly none of the companies have gone as far as Google has to actually buy a power company. Many of them are sort of striking these arm's length deals with nuclear developers, hydropower developers. It's sort of a wide range of alternative energy sources people are tapping. So Google seems like it's trying to sort of get out ahead of a lot of these potentially huge changes coming over the next year.
Last question for you, and I don't know if you'll know the answer to this or not, but I know that buying a power company is obviously a way to be vertically integrated and have more control over your costs. When a company decides to go private for their power, uh, is there like is it a going rate for electricity, or can you make it cheaper? Like, can you win on power by being cheaper? Does it depend then on what way you're getting the power in the first place? Like, I'm just wondering about the economics of going private.
Yeah, well, I think maybe another benefit Google sees in this transaction is, yes, to your point, maybe an opportunity to vertically integrate some of this. Google is a big data center developer itself. And so it has these relationships with suppliers. And, if they can sort of uh, make it so that the technology that Intersect was already building for Google can now sort of scale at a lower cost, I think that would be a huge win for the company.
Great. Well, Miles, I want to thank you for coming on. That is Miles Kruppa, our finance reporter here at The Information. Okay, that does it for today's show. A reminder, we are on this stream Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. I want to thank you all for joining us. I really do appreciate your viewership. I'm already excited for our next show tomorrow. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. Bye-bye for now.